Yeah, sure. Come on, I'll walk you home.
Hello, and welcome to Beer 101, our first ever virtual after hours event. This event sold out, so we are really excited to have everyone here. My name is Emma. I work at the Museum of Life and Science. If you've been to an after hours event, you maybe have seen me at some point. I'm usually running and sweaty and really excited about what I'm doing. So I will be co-hosting tonight, and as people are coming in, you can go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat or just hang out. We look like we're about 70% of our participants are here, so we hopefully will get some more people trickling in, but we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to give you guys a quick rundown of how this is going to work, and then we will get started with our tasting, and I'll let you know about our Zoom features, and then we'll get going. So first of all, I will be introducing our co-hosts and our other panelists, and they'll have a quick chance to tell you about them and the breweries they work for and what they do. And before we start talking about beer specifically, we'll just hear about the breweries, and then we'll switch to the beer tasting portion of the event. And then at the end, you'll have some time to ask questions if you want, or just chat with our beer panelists, who are all really excited to be here. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you have a couple of different features. There's a question and answer feature. So if you have any pressing questions throughout the event, you can put them in there, and we will either answer them live on video, or our panelists can see those at all times, so they might just answer it in the chat if that's easier. And then the chat, we want to just keep everyone engaged and as involved as possible. We want to hear what you're doing and what you're thinking, and we want to pretend that you're here with us. That being said, just keep in mind we want the chat to remain respectful and kind, but I am not really worried about that. We have a good group of people here at the After Hours community. Then we have you have a hand raise function. So at some point, one of our beer reps might ask you if you've been to their brewery or if you've tried their beer, and you can just use your hand raise just to give them a quick idea of how everybody's doing. And then finally, we have some polling. So I'll give you guys an example poll. This one is, which museum animal would make the best brewery spokesperson? And you all have a chance to vote. So I'll give you guys a few seconds. Okay, this is interesting. It's really coming down to 2 at the moment. If you've never been to the museum, you can imagine what these animals are like, and then in the future, you can go visit them. All right, I'm going to end this poll, and you can see, according to our panel, Lightning the donkey would be a brewery spokesperson. So our panel. Now you know, if you have any need in the future, Lightning is available, and he's a really great rep. So there you go. So those are your features. If you have any questions, pop in the question and answer box. Otherwise, we will keep going. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce my co-host. Andy Morrison is here. He's a longtime friend of the museum and a certified Cicerone. So let's give him a warm welcome. He is going to be co-hosting the tasting because he knows way more about beer than I do.
Hey, thanks, Emma. Excited to be joining up for this, and this is kind of fun for me because I'm getting a chance to look at some friendly faces, some folks that I've known for a few years, and some breweries that I've worked with over the last few years. So this is pretty fun. I am, as she mentioned, a Cicerone. How many people, like, I'm interested to see how this hand raising thing works. How many folks out there are Cicerones or certified beer servers? Do we have any of those in the audience? Do we?
I'm seeing 3 hands raised.
Cool.
Got a couple.
Okay. So we got a few people out there. All right. So the Cicerone program is essentially a sommelier program for beers, and it breaks down into 5 categories. Everything that you'd want to know about beer. So styles of beer, how it's made, the history of beer, food and beer together, and judging beer, all that sort of stuff. It has a written portion. You write essays, short answer questions, all that sort of good stuff. And then there's also a tasting portion. So you have to go through a tasting panel and taste things blind, be able to pick out bad flavors, be able to pick out good flavors, be able to talk about all the different styles of beer just from taste. So that was something that took me a few years to get through and get to the advanced Cicerone certification that I have. So it was a pretty rigorous study with lots of drinking involved. So not the worst thing to study for. I want to invite you guys at this point to open up a beer. So before we begin anything else, please go ahead and open something up. Save yourself some, because we will be tasting through and talking about the stuff that we're tasting, but feel free to crack open a beer with me here, and we'll get around to introducing the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much, and I'm sorry, I did accidentally, you're an advanced Cicerone. I was corrected in the chat, so I'm sorry, I did not mean to undercut all the work you did.
No.
Okay, so really quick before we get started with the rest of our introductions, the last thing I'm going to say is at the top of the chat, I included the link to donate. This is a fundraiser for the museum, and all of the funds from this event go towards the operating budget of the museum, which does everything from feeding the animals to creating the exhibits to summer camp scholarships, all of the things that make the museum such a wonderful place. So if you would like to do another donation and have a chance to win this amazing prize pack from the museum, it is a beer themed prize pack. So it has a little bottle opener keychain, 2 beer chemistry tumblers. This is a homebrew kit to make your own brown ale. It has everything you need in it to make your own beer, which is really a perfect pandemic activity, I think. And then also 2 tickets to any after hours event in the next year, virtual, or hopefully we will eventually be doing real live events again. So the link for that is in there. I also sent it in an email, and it's on Facebook. So if you make a donation anytime today, you'll be in the running to win that prize pack. And I think that is it for me. I know you are probably sick of hearing me talk already. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with our introductions. First, we have Jason Harriman from Sweetwater Brewing.
What's happening, everybody? Happy Friday. Hope everybody's ready to enjoy some beers here. I am extremely excited to be on this. So thank you, Museum of Life and Science. Thank you, Harris Beverage. Thank you, Andy, for taking the time out of your extremely busy schedule. I see you're selling some beer as we speak. So for you to just take a few minutes away, thank you so much for that. I certainly appreciate it. As Emma mentioned, my name is Jason Harriman. I am the North Carolina sales manager for Sweetwater Brewing Company. I've been with Sweetwater for about 5 years. Earlier this summer would have been my 5th year at Sweetwater. Before that, I had worked various beer jobs in San Diego, Washington, D.C. for Anheuser-Busch Distributors. I got into beer, I think the very similar way that most people get into beer. You end up drinking enough of it that you figure, I'm going to get paid to do this at some point. So made that jump about 12 years ago, and I haven't looked back. Came on board with Sweetwater because a number of reasons, but the beer is just phenomenal. And first time I had it, I just knew I was kind of connected to the brewery in some way. So I'm really glad that I was able to get on board with Sweetwater. We started back in 1997. We're based out of Atlanta, Georgia. A couple of college students from Colorado actually visited Atlanta and realized that there was an absence of craft beer in the South, especially. And Atlanta being one of the largest cities, it made sense to start a brewery there. And we like to think that we kind of brought the West Coast hoppy IPAs to the East Coast, being one of the first breweries to do that back in the 90s, before the real big, or I guess during the first big craft boom. But at that time, coming over with some fresh hoppy stuff that the South hadn't seen before, it certainly helped us as we grew to being the 15th largest craft brewery in the country today. So glad to be here. Thanks again, Museum of Life and Science. I think I've used up all my time, so I will pass it back on to you.
Thank you so much. So next up, we have Kevin Tyndall from Appalachian Mountain Brewery.
Hey, what's up, guys? How are y'all doing? Not sure I can do a better intro than what Jason just did, but I'm glad to virtually see everyone. Thank you for supporting the museum, and thanks to the museum and Andy and Harris Wholesale for putting this together. We appreciate that. I've been in the beer business for almost 9 years. It's pretty crazy. Some of these guys up here I've known on the panel for a long time as well. And I've been with AMB for now 4.5, going on 5 years. So I joined the brewery when we launched statewide. It's been a great ride, and we've had a lot of fun along the way. AMB, if you guys are not familiar with, by the way, if you could raise your hands if you are familiar with Appalachian Mountain Brewery, I would appreciate that. I'd love to know who knows us and who doesn't. We are based out of Boone. A lot of you, I would imagine, know Boone. It has a great reputation, and it was started in 2013 by a couple guys that are actually cousins, Nathan Kalashek and Chris Zeber. Nathan was actually in the chemistry program at ASU, Appalachian State University, for those of you that aren't familiar with the area, and he transferred into the fermentation science curriculum because they finished that curriculum while he was there, and he graduated in the first graduating class. So it was pretty awesome in that inaugural class, and then went on to start the brewery with his cousin Chris, who had gotten I believe it was an organic science degree at another university that will not be named. And they've done a great job. Again, we've had a great run. I'll say 3 big things that we're kind of built on is community, sustainability, and philanthropy. Boone Creek Blonde is the beer we're featuring tonight. And we've actually partnered with Be Downtown, which is a company based here in the Triangle. And Emma, if you have that video, if that's still able to roll, we can check that out and get some additional color on that.
We make Boone Creek Blonde in the high country with wildflower honey. When we saw Be Downtown's commitment to the sustainability to support beehives throughout the Southeast, we were really excited to reach out and start a collaboration.
When you buy a case of Boone Creek Blonde, you're supporting an entire ecosystem. This partnership with Appalachian Mountain Brewery shows just how much can be done when people come together and work together like a hive.
Cool. And if I've got any time left, I'll just say Be Downtown is a great organization. We sponsor a couple of hives. One is in Durham, one is in Raleigh. So we have 2 spots in the triangle. And it's been a great partnership with those guys. Lee Catherine went to NC State, so there's a lot of homegrown talent there. And since Honey has been in Boone Creek Blonde from the beginning, it was a very natural partnership for us and something that we've been really excited about and see what we can grow over the next few years.
That is so cool. I've had that beer probably 100 times and I did not know all of that about all its local love. That's so cool. I don't know if you saw, it looked like we had like 35 people in the group say they were familiar with A&B. So
okay, great. Thank you.
Pretty solid. Yeah. All right. Next up, we have Jason Holtz from Firestone Walker.
Hey, how y'all doing? I'm Jason Hulse. I'm the territory manager for Firestone Walker Brewing Company. So that means that I manage the sales team throughout the entirety of the Mid-Atlantic. So running from North Carolina all the way up through Maryland and all the folks that I've got underneath me out there. But I've been in the beer industry since 2007. Done a little bit of everything out here, but I've been with Firestone Walker for about 3.5 years. Started up in the Northeast and just made my way down to North Carolina. Just at the end of June. So I'm a newbie out here. So I'm getting the feel for the state out here right now, and just going around and socially distancing, but kissing hands and shaking babies basically. For those who aren't familiar with Firestone Walker, we've actually been brewing for just over 24 years at this point in time. We're based on the Central Coast of California. We started out in Paso Robles, right in the middle of wine country, originally doing pretty much nothing but English style beers. And throughout the years, we've really evolved and changed, experimenting with wild and spontaneously fermented beers. We're well known for our Spirit Barrel Aged series. And of course, being from California, in the 90s, we are known for a lot of our IPAs. Those tend to be the most popular series of beers that we do. And our most popular one in North Carolina is going to be Mind Haze IPA. The company originally was started by David Walker and Adam Firestone, they were 2 brothers-in-law that decided they wanted to expand out of the wine business and go into beer. And basically, at the beginning of the 2000s, they went beer full time. So it's been a fun journey for us as a whole. But thanks to the Museum of Life and Science, to Harris Beverage and Sam's Bottle Shop for putting this all on. This is a great way for us to be able to interact, because it is a weird time not being able to do tastings and events and things like that, and seeing folks normally. So I'm appreciative that we're all here.
Sorry, I was muted. I was just saying thank you. And moving on, we have Amanda Burns from White Street Brewing.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much again to the Durham Museum of Life and Science, Sam's, and Harris Beverages for sponsoring this event. I'm really excited to be here and excited to showcase some of our beers tonight and talk a little bit more about what White Street does. So I have been in the beer industry for about 9 years, similar to Kevin with A&B. We actually entered the beer business within a few months of one another. I have the level 2 certification, so certified Cicerone, so 1 notch below Andy. But again, that was something I worked really hard for over the years. And dedicated myself to many steady nights and many beer samplings as well, but well worth it. I've been with White Street now for about a year. Prior to that, I had about 8 years of wholesale experience. So I worked with a local wholesaler here in Raleigh. Started out on the on-premise team and then moved on to the craft team over the years. And while I greatly enjoyed that experience, I was ready to move to the supplier side and couldn't have found a better fit than White Street. So White Street got started in Wake Forest back in 2012. Our owner, Dino Radasta, had retired early, lucky guy, got out of IT and moved to Wake Forest and found the beautiful downtown of Wake Forest and decided he wanted to do something to Wake Forest and really wanted to try to revitalize that beautiful downtown area. And so he started buying up some real estate. And one of the buildings he bought was an old Chevy dealership. He initially thought about creating a restaurant, but decided that was too much work, so he built a brewery. He had never brewed before in his life, didn't know what was really happening in the craft beer industry, but decided that it was the right move. And here we are almost 8 years later. So it was a great move on his part, I think. Our original tap room is still located in downtown Wake Forest on White Street, very original. That's where our name came from, obviously. But you can visit us at our tap room. We also have a full production facility that we moved to in 2015, where most of our beer is now produced, and that's in Youngsville. So just a few minutes away from downtown Wake Forest. But we have about a 30 barrel brew system. We produce roughly between 8,000 to 10,000 barrels of beer a year. We're excited to be here and excited to be a part of this event tonight. So again, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. All right, next up we have Greg Little from Wicked Weed.
All right. Well, thanks again for hosting this evening, and really excited to be here tonight. So my name is Greg. I've worked for Wicked Weed now for a little over 6 years. Been in the beer industry total for a little over 7. I started at a small farmhouse brewery in Morganton called Fauna Flora, and then made my way over to Wicked Weed about 4 months into working for Fauna Flora. So it's been kind of like a one-trick pony in a way. I feel like I've worked for Wicked Weed ever since the get-go. But we started as a small brew pub in downtown Asheville in 2012. Wicked Weed is really the story of 2 lifelong family friends, the Guthys and the Dickinsons. Rick and Denise Guthie and their son Ryan are kind of like the business and brains aspect of the business. And then you got Walt and Luke Dickinson on the other side, the brewers. Walt and Luke spent a lot of time over on the West Coast back in 2009, 2010. And actually gained a whole lot of inspiration from the West Coast breweries over there, Russian River and DeGard and Cascade. And just got to tasting a bunch of these beers and realized that there wasn't anything really in North Carolina that was at the time showcasing West Coast style IPAs and really sour beers. They wanted to bring that back to the East Coast. So they kind of got that inspiration, came back to the Eastern Seaboard and approached the Guthys and said, hey, would you guys be interested in becoming business partners together? So sat down in the basement of the Guthys house one weekend and tasted through a bunch of beers. And the Guthys were extremely impressed by what Walt and Luke had produced, but they said, you guys said you wanted to put this brewery over in Chattanooga, but we want it to be in Asheville, where we're all from. And, it's place is very near and dear to all of us. So we opened up in December of 2012 with 25 beers, all unique on draft on the first day, which was pretty crazy. I think that definitely put us a little bit in the limelight, and then people started tasting a bunch of our sour beers. And I think that's really what got Wicked Weed taken off, was our sour program. We won a gold medal at GABF in 2013 for Serenity Wild Ale. We made sour beers such as Black Angel and Genesis, and all those beers kind of like came into fruition and kind of put us more in the spotlight and elevated us a little further. And that's when we were able to produce enough sour beer and dedicate an entire tasting room and open the first sour beer tasting room in the Southeast, the Funkatorium, in 2014. That's whenever I came into the picture, 2000. So started working out as a bartender there at the Funkatorium, and then moved over to the sales and distribution side. We opened up our production facility in 2015, which is where we first bottled Pernicious IPA and Freak of Nature. And that is a 50-barrel brew house just west of downtown Asheville. We saw a lot of success from that, continued to grow. And then we opened up the sour production facility in 2016. And the rest is kind of history from there. So we'll be drinking Burst, which is our session sour this evening. I'm real excited to let you guys try that with me and Andy side by side, getting the tasting notes all the way through. So it's, we wanted to make a sour beer that was more or less for masses, and something for someone who's never had sour before that wanted to try a sour beer, or someone who just really likes a really fruit forward beer. So excited to be here and excited to showcase that with all you guys.
Thanks so much, Greg. I do have a question from the audience. Somebody asked if you are making Coolcumber this year.
We've already made Coolcumber, and Coolcumber season is behind us, but we do have Guilty Pleasures coming soon, which is our mixed variety imperial stout set. And that has milk and cookies, German chocolate cake, weed brownie, which was our anniversary beer last year. And it should be here in the next 2 to 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken.
Very exciting. All right, and then last but not least, we have Maddie Beeson from STEM Ciders. Welcome, Maddie.
Oh wait, this is this virtual? Is it, so I don't need a mask? There's no mask needed here? Oh boy, okay, sorry about that. Hold on 1 second. Oh, I've had a heck of a day, but here I am. I'm Maddie Beeson, I'm from STEM Ciders. You guys might know me from restaurants in Durham, like Maddie B's, Six Plates Wine Bar, Pops, Root Claire, the list goes on. I left the restaurant business about 2 years ago and got into cider, as I had been continuing to do, and got a job working with STEM, running their market on the East Coast. So I run about 10 states, and yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to do things a little differently. I'm going to tell you a little list about STEM in this first 5 minutes, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about cider because I'm the only cider guy here. So I want to give you a little bit more information because I have a feeling a lot of you guys are here for all the amazing beers that we're going to taste, and hopefully you'll really enjoy my cider as well. But Emma, you've got some slides for me. Can you pull those up, maybe? Perfect. So this is cider. This is our cidery in Lafayette, Colorado. It's about equidistant from Boulder and Denver. And as you can see, it sort of faces the Western Range, and it is gorgeous. It's absolutely beautiful. It's about 55,000 square feet of production and restaurant and food and tap room. And it is just absolutely beautiful. I'm gonna roll through these slides, but Emma, are you in? Yeah, perfect. So we'll just skip that one. Perfect. Cider. What is cider? Cider is an alcoholic beverage made from fermented apples, guys. So this is very different from beer. There is no brew process. We don't heat anything. We literally ferment. So we're actually a little bit more like wine than we are beer in our production style. We literally, the only two ingredients you need to make cider are apple juice and yeast. That yeast can come wildly from the environment that the juice is in, or you can add it to the juice and create your fermentation process. Lots of other flavorings can go into cider, some during the fermentation process and some after. One who makes cider is a cider maker, and the place where you make cider is a cidery or a cider house. We just like to throw that in there. Quick history. We're going to skip through most of this, and you can read it while I'm talking. The main points are in 55 BC was the first recorded reference on paper of cider. Julius Caesar found the Celtic Britons fermenting cider from wild apples. And then he took that and sort of spread it throughout all of Europe. So that's the first time that we see it. From there, we jump into a couple of different places. The big one for me there is in 1800, the pioneer nurseryman that you've heard, John Chapman. Everybody hears about how he was planting apples all over the place, and it's a great kid's story, right? But nobody tells you that the reason that he was planting apples was not so we could eat them, because most of the apples at that point were really too tart for consumption. He was planting apples so that we could drink them. So his intention all along was to be able to make cider. And that was why he was going around the country planting apples. We'll go on to the next slide. Cider had its height in the late 1800s, and then the early 1900s, we hit temperance and prohibition, and that was devastating because there was also a move into cities rather than towns, and we really lost a lot of the cider because people weren't living out in the suburbs in the country, and they weren't producing apples nearly as much. Plus, there was a lot of burning of trees and things of that nature. So we lost a lot of our apple crop through that process. After Prohibition, everything picked up in the beer and spirits world because they were really easy to make because of the products they were using. So you could make them in cities rather than really need orchards to produce. So there wasn't nearly as much space necessary for that. So we jumped to the 1990s, dubbed the cider revival. It jumped up for a second. It didn't work out too well. And now we're basically to here, where the mid 2000s, we really got into cider. Craft cider really began to take a turn. And here we are today with France making more of the cider than anyone else, and Europe and the US making up 65% of the world's population. We'll go next. I'm going to skip this one. We're not going to give you all the apple information. You don't want all of that. I will tell you about cider apples and culinary apples. Cider apples are traditionally tannic, really high in acid, almost unedible. Some can be, barely palatable, but most you're really just going to be too tart to really enjoy. Culinary apples are going to be the sweeter apples that you see every day. At STEM, most of our ciders are made out of culinary apples, but we do have some of our things that we put into bottles and store in oak and things of that nature that we do make out of cider apples as well. Cider apples are really difficult to find and are much more expensive. So that's usually why you see such a big difference between cider prices. You'll see lower ciders or less expensive ciders made out of culinary apples, and then higher priced ciders are typically made out of cider apples. All right? We're skipping that. You don't want to know about orchards. We're going to move through that. One more for me. Perfect process from the apple to the harvesting. We harvest. When the apples are ready, we mill and press. In milling, what we have to do is we have to break the apple up into essentially a mill or a pulp, so that we can extract the juice, because it's not as easy to get juice out of milled apples as it is out of grapes or other fruits, as you've probably found before. Once we have that juice, as mentioned, it's fermented and then moved on to the blending. So once we have that fermentation process where the yeast eat the sugar and turn it into alcohol, we end up with somewhere typically between 5 and 8% alcohol. A nice little piece in there is that if you find ciders below 5% or above 8, 9 times out of 10, you found something they've either added sugar to or added a dilution of some sort to create that alcohol percentage, because it's incredibly difficult to make ciders outside the range of 5 to 8% without doing something else to it. Then we blend. We take all those ciders. Typically, we take all of the different juices and we make a cider out of those, being the best sort of process of juices that we find. Yep. Maturation, depending on what we're making, sometimes we'll store it in oak. A lot of times in Britain, almost everything they make is stored in oak. You'll also see things that we make stored in bourbon barrels, sometimes in stainless steel. It allows for complexity of flavor and for the ciders to really just become more interesting. We're going to pass this stabilization and packaging. You don't want to know about that. Cider producing regions, the main cider producing regions, mostly in Europe, England, Germany, Austria. The big ones are Spain, France, and England. So those are going to produce more cider than anyone else in the world between those 3 places. Most of the cider made in Spain doesn't actually get exported. In fact, 70% of the cider made in Spain gets consumed in Spain. In Brittany, a lot more is exported, and England, there's still over 50% of their consumption is within country, but they're starting to export more as well. When you get to the United States, you see that we spread out a lot. You end up in a ton of different regions, most of them being apple producing regions. So New York, Washington, Michigan, Pennsylvania, California, those are the largest producing states for apples. And so that's where you find a ton of the production in the United States. Next slide. I'm not doing that because I think I'm probably running out of time, aren't I, Emma? Yeah, we'll move on. Keep going. I think that's it. We're good. We did it. I rolled through that. I'm sorry it was so fast, but I wanted to give you a little bit of information.
Yeah, I'm glad that you were able to. I think in the comments, it sounds like people were learning some stuff, excited about cider, all good things.
Love that.
Great. So, Andy, I think our first beer is Guide Beer. Is that right?
That's the one. So I'll talk a little bit here, just to kind of introduce the tasting while Jason cracks open his second guide beer to walk us through it. But you know, when you're doing tasting, you got it?
Yes, I was saying.
Oh, that's not the second. Is that what you said?
No, not at all. Definitely
that
the second.
Is only the second. Okay,
yes.
All right. You know, one of the things that we think about with tasting is it takes more sensory to do tasting than just your tongue. So thinking about aroma, the color and clarity of a beer, all of those things go into how we perceive a beer. So you know, it's important to keep those in mind when you're going in and tasting. So I made sure to grab a glass for myself to be able to look at the beer. And so I'm going to go through, I may not show the color of every single beer, and it's kind of hard with that virtual background as it disappears on me. But, you know, one of the things that you really look for with a beer like this, definitely is like clarity of the beer. How does that head form? You know, you give it a good smell, you get in there, give it a good breathing in. If your nose is the quickest sense to kind of lock on to something, and it's also the quickest to lose memory. So if you feel like, you know, you've smelled it, but you're not really sure what you're smelling, a good thing is to go smell the back of your hand and go back to the beer, because you're resetting. Every time you do that, your nose is forgetting what it just smelled. So kind of an interesting thing, but yeah, with that, let's jump into talking about this beer in particular. So I was really excited to see this one on the list and wanted to jump in first because this is a really light, delicate beer, as you would expect from a really good craft lager. And this is that exact time of year in the sweltering heat that I want to hang out and have something that's low ABV, got a good amount of flavor, is super refreshing, and that I can drink while I'm pushing around the lawnmower. So, Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about like tell us about where this beer comes from and what it means to Sweetwater. What inspired this beer for you guys?
Sure. Thanks, Andy. You know, it's this tasting, and I'm glad you're on it because you're going to be able to walk everybody through a proper tasting on all these different beers. So the order of this was certainly set up in a way to make sure that it got the best out of each beer and cider that we're going to be sampling. So Guide Beer is a light 4% crisp, clean lager. This is certainly going to be the lightest on the palate, easiest drinking, just a nice, good, as you mentioned, lawnmower beer. So it's a really good one to kind of kick off something like this. As I mentioned at the beginning, we certainly pride ourselves on being a hop-forward brewery. A lot of IPAs, a lot of hoppy pale ales. And we also I guess one of the pillars of our company is fishing, being outdoors, adventures, kayaking, paddling, anything like that we're outside in the water, just having a good time and enjoying some beers. And we partner with a lot of different conservation organizations, outdoor enthusiasts, that type of thing. And for a long time, we had a cooler full of IPAs out on the water. Of course, most of us that drink beer for a living, sell beer for a living, we can drink those IPAs for quite a while on the boat, but it might not be for everybody. So we got a lot of feedback from especially the organizations that we partner with that said, if you guys had a nice light, easy drinking crisp beer that I could pound, while I'm out there fly fishing, that would certainly be great. So we thought about that. We had already been thinking about a way that we could give back to the guides who show us the way, as we say. So that kind of formed Guide Beer. The whole concept is, again, out on the water, whatever you're doing to enjoy yourself, this is the beer for you. We also have a portion of the proceeds of Guide Beer, 11% of every case sold goes to guides in need. So as I mentioned, we do partner with a lot of different guides throughout the country, whether they are affected by a hurricane or any other natural disaster, or even just a personal issue that might stop them, prevent them from doing what they love to do, which is, again, showing us these adventures that we all love to go on. This is our way to give back to them, give them a good beer to go out and do what they do, and then give back to them with through the cases that we sell. So that's a little bit about Guide Beer.
Yeah.
Jason, we have a question. Somebody asked, does Guide Beer have different can designs?
Yes, so thank you. Great question. There are 4 different cans in each 12-pack with a different theme, a different scene, if you will, from fly fishing to, well, I can just show you quite a few of them here. So this one is a mountain for the snowboarders among us. We have this fly fisherman. Actually, this is not Kevin from Appalachian Mountain. I know the resemblance is striking. It is not him. Nice mountain biking scene. And then closing it out, a nice fly fishing scene. So 4 different cans, again, just kind of calling out the different adventures and excursions and guides that we like to work with throughout the country.
Yeah, and what I've really appreciated about this beer, full disclosure, I've been working, or I used to work with Sweetwater as a wholesaler, and so know this beer well. And what I really appreciated about it was it kind of lives into that exact environment that you would want to take it into, right? I mean, you're out on the water, you're going for a hike or something like that. You've responsibly brought cans instead of bottles, and you're hanging out having a beer that's perfect for that kind of an occasion, right? And the flavor balance of it, the aroma balance of it, everything is there in balance. Nothing's, you're not getting slapped around the face with, the bitterest hops that you could have, right? It's that style that just really fits into being out and active and in the heat and everything like that. So I really appreciate that beer for that.
Andrew, we have a tasting question that you might be about to answer it. Somebody asked, on the tasting card, what does it mean by mouthfeel?
Yeah, so mouthfeel is, there's a couple of different kind of ways that you could go about it. Like mouthfeel to me talks about like the dryness. Like you think about wines being really dry to being really sweet. So if you have something that's sweet to dry, in the same way in beer. So you try to strive for balance, but obviously there are styles that are targeted towards, big, heavy, sweet stouts that are supposed to be sweet balanced versus dry balanced. And in addition to that, you also have carbonation levels. So that's the thing that beer has that wine can't compete with, right? You have sparkling wines, but every beer essentially being carbonated to different degrees means that that you're tailoring carbonation, and this is something that I think a lot of people don't fully understand or recognize. Is the carbonation level of a beer is usually a targeted, conscious thing that a brewer is doing to try to craft that experience of the beer that you're drinking. So Belgian beers that have a lot more sugar to them are often dried out a lot more by heavier carbonation. They're a lot lighter on the tongue. They kind of bounce along. You drink them, you taste the sweetness, and then it leaves, right? The carbonation kind of cleans the tongue off, sweeps the cloying sweetness away, and leaves you with a really nice, dry, balanced aftertaste. So there's components of mouthfeel to that. There's slickness. You know, you can talk about the degree of how heavy and slick something is, how much it lingers on your tongue, which again kind of gets back to sugar and sweetness and cloying, but it can in its own right have its own attribute of slickness to a beer. So those are some. That's as detailed as probably you want me to get at the moment.
I think that's perfect.
Yeah. So in this beer, just to finish it off, again, in this beer, like if I was going to pick out some flavor and aroma attributes, you know, what you really get out of this is a really kind of light water cracker, sort of grainy sweetness. You don't want like a roasty sweetness, right? That's for a stout. You don't want something that smells or tastes like grape nuts. That's more of like an amber ale or something like that, right? You just want that malt to be there. Like it absolutely needs to have a malt character, but you don't want it to kind of overtake or overwhelm. So it's that really kind of that water cracker sense of a beer that really sits in delicate balance with the slight amount of hops that is just there enough to provide enough bitterness to balance it out. So great beer overall. Awesome.
Excellent. Should we move into the next one? Yeah, let's do it. So the second one on the list, the one that I opened at the start here, is the AMB Blonde. So you can pull that one out, give that a little pour for yourself. So Kevin, while we're taking some initial taste of this beer, why don't you kind of describe what you guys created with this?
Yeah, Boone Creek Blonde. So foolishly enough, I thought I was only going to need one. So when Jason started talking, I had to go get a second. So rookie mistake. You would think after 9 years I would have learned, but hey, we all have our off days. So Boone Creek Blonde, originally named Honey Badger. So for those of you guys who do know us well, who've known us for a long time, this beer has been around since basically day one, along with Longleaf. And thank you guys for some of y'all that were giving Longleaf some praises. Appreciate that. Honey Badger was, as has been the case with a lot of names in craft beer these days, someone else had already used that name. So eventually we had to change it, which is not the biggest thing in the world. Boone Creek actually runs right beside the brewery. You can literally jump right over the creek when you walk off the steps out back. So this beer needed to be something that could complement Longleaf, which at that point was already one of our top selling, if not our top selling beer. And this is something that really anyone can drink. Not quite as light as Jason's beer, Guy beer from Sweetwater, but the honey and the orange zest really add a nice dynamic to the beer that some of the really lighter styles don't have. Honey, even though we generally think that it will add sweetness to it, it really actually tends to dry it out. And you can really dive into some of the more in-depth scientific aspects of how that works. But a lot of those sugars actually ferment out, but the aroma actually really almost kind of leaves you thinking that it's going to be sweeter, and it's really not. And then the orange zest adds some nice citrus appeal. And that actually pairs with the Cascade hops that we add, which aren't a lot. This is definitely not a hoppy blonde by any stretch, but you need a little bit of hops in there to balance any residual sugars. So again, fantastic beer. We also happened to take home gold at the Great American Beer Festival in Denver. This October will be 3 years ago. So could not be more proud of that. It's something that we had been hoping we were going to grab for a while. And yeah, it's really fantastic. And I see someone asked how much honey is in the beer. How much honey is in the beer per batch? Let me glance my notes real quick. I'll be honest, I'd have to ask Nathan and Chris. I wouldn't even want to speculate. It can go a long way. Andy, do you recall? I mean, it can vary a lot.
I don't.
I mean, how much honey?
Yeah, I don't remember.
And any of the other panelists can speak up too. I don't recall how much we use per batch. And that is obviously going to depend on how big of a batch you're talking about, because if you're brewing 20 barrels of beer versus 500 barrels of beer at one time, it's you're talking about varying amounts. So I'd have to ask. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I think what the honey helps provide for this, like you said, is that there's definitely a sweetness on the aroma, and then you taste the beer, and it's a lot more dry than you might expect from the aroma. One of the other things that I noticed on the aroma, and one of the reasons why I wanted to do this beer second, is if you still have your guide beer in a glass or in the can or something, you can get a sniff of it and go back and forth, smelling back and forth between these two beers. What you get is like a perfect example of the difference between a lager and an ale. And the two are kind of the two furthest branches apart from each other, are the original kind of branches on the family tree of beers, right? You have lagers and you have ales. Those are thought of traditionally as your two basic styles. And in ales, what you're getting is higher fermentation temperature. I'm going to go into the science a little bit here because it's the science of beer, right? With an ale, what you're getting out of an ale is the fruit esters that come off the yeast. So what the yeast does is, before it starts actually producing alcohol, it starts producing acids. And those acids then combine later with alcohol that it's produced in a chemical process that forms these esters. So a lager fermentation, a lot of what you're trying to do when you're creating a lager is avoid esters. You're trying to create what's called clean beer. Beer that really showcases the malt, showcases the hops, and leaves those things just hanging out there to really do the work for the beer. In an ale, you're creating a lot of fruit flavors, pushing those into the beer using the yeast itself to create that. So you should be able to switch back and forth between these two beers and kind of smell like the stronger fruitiness. It's like a bright red apple in the Boone Creek Blonde versus the guide beer. And that's a sign that, again, you've got two that probably have incredibly similar grain bills when it comes down to it, very light amounts of hops to them. So the big difference between these two beers is going to be the yeast and the way that the beer is fermented. So, so kind of an interesting contrast between those. And then I also really enjoy this beer in general. It's another great summer day crushable kind of beer. Is there anything else, Kevin, before we jump on to the next person, anything else that you would?
I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but yeah, I mean, you guys get out there, try it out if you haven't, as far as obviously you're trying it now, but friends and family that haven't tried it. We partnered with Be Downtown. They've been great. We look to continue that going forward. And thank you to whoever made that comment about the hats. I don't know if you're specifically talking about my hat, but obviously Jason's got one, Greg's got one. So I'm a big hat guy.
Kevin, it was Roe.
So there we go. Look at that. Look at that. We are all hat people on this panel. So and Hyder Road. And continue to ask questions. I love the questions, as is everybody else, but thank you.
Yeah, and if there's anybody that has any questions that you forgot to mention or you think of later, you know, keep putting them in there and stuff, because we'll circle back around and have kind of a Q&A at the end.
Hey, one quick question.
For
I forgot to ask, how many
jump back
people have
in.
tried Boone Creek Blonde before? Could you raise your hands? And now I'm done. Got to get that.
It's growing. Looks like 13 out of the 77 people here. It's a big new pool of people.
Lots of new people. All right. Thank you for your participation, guys. Appreciate it.
This actually is a question for you, Kevin. It says, if we start to brew beer, do we have to grow a beard?
Well, yeah, Amanda's shaking her head. So the answer is no, you don't have to, but it makes the beer better. It makes the beer. It's, you know, it's a thing in the beer industry. A lot of us like to be in the industry because it is not a typical 9 to 5 behind the desk. And I think it just attracts people who, I'll be honest, like kind of a different work-life balance. So, but no, if you haven't grown a beard, I highly encourage you to grow one. You can do it. I believe in you.
I keep trying, Kev. Thanks for the motivation. But I've been growing mine as long as you've been growing yours. This is what I got.
I'm here for you, brother.
Awesome. Well, the next beer I want to bring up is the Firestone Walker Flyjack. So crack that one open if you haven't already. This one is a really interesting beer. And I'm going to let Jason tell us a little bit about it before we jump into the tasting.
Absolutely. So as I had said before, you know, Firestone Walker has been brewing for quite a while. And anyone who knows much about the history of Firestone Walker, and more importantly about Matt Brynildson, our brewmaster, is this guy is an absolute genius when it comes to brewing. Before he was ever brewing, he actually was working in labs in the Midwest, in labs that actually did hop extractions. And a lot of his job was isolating hop compounds and basically figuring out what made hops tick. So it affected a lot of how he built beers over the years. And one of our most popular beers in recent history has been a beer called Mind Haze, which was about a 3-year project, really dialing it in. Firestone Walker was the classic West Coast IPA brewery. You know, we were big, bold, in-your-face hops. And as the hazy IPA trend came, Matt actually really enjoyed what he was tasting coming out of New England, but he didn't really like the lack of stability that came with it. So he kind of took it upon himself to figure out, how do we make this beer stable? And once we figured out how to do Mind Haze, it opened up a lot of doors for us. So this year, in the middle of a pandemic, we decided it would be a beautiful time to launch a brand new product, which was called Flyjack. And this was about a year of R&D after we had really dialed in Mind Haze. We wanted to figure out how to do a lighter hazy option. And we called upon a lot of the research that we had done, a lot of the past batches of other beers that we had done, and actually pulled some notes, not only from Mind Haze, but from a series of beers that we had been doing called Luponic Distortion. And if you know about Luponic Distortion, it's a single base beer that we change the hops every 90 to 120 days. And one of the things that we learned through Luponic Distortion, that there are certain hop varietals that punch way above their weight class. They give you not only big flavor, but can actually layer and add texture to a beer. And it tricks your brain into thinking that it's a much fuller, much bigger, bolder beer than it is. So Flyjack, one of the biggest challenges is this is a big balancing act. Not only do you want a lot of hop flavor, but you also need to be able to keep that, you need to keep the calories light, you need to keep the alcohol light, and still have it all in balance. And that is a very, very, very difficult thing to do. Especially because the way that you balance out your hops is with sugars. So we had to figure out hops that weren't going to add too much aggressive, astringent bitterness, but still had a ton of flavor, especially those really beautiful fruity flavors that you expect out of a hazy IPA. And we settled on a number of different varietals, but the biggest one was this really cool hop called Strata. We fell in love with this, and this was one that just loaded with flavor and added body, or added texture, I should say. I shouldn't say body, but added texture to the beer. So with that, we really didn't have a lot of wiggle room to play with if we wanted to keep this under 100 calories, because at 4% alcohol by volume, about 80 of your calories actually come from the alcohol itself. So there's 16 calories wiggle room to kind of play around with. So with that, we actually utilized some really cool techniques, and one of them was an enzyme that broke down the big chain sugars into smaller, more digestible sugars for the yeast. And that gave us more fermentables to play with. But then we basically used oats and wheat to add body and texture to the beer, and that's where that body comes from. So it feels like a much bigger beer than you'd expect from a beer that's coming in at 96 calories and 5 grams of carbs. We're very excited about this. Again, couldn't have launched it at a worse time, and people are really loving it though. It's I can tell you, I drank a whole bunch out of the Outer Banks just about a month ago. So I'm hope you guys enjoy this one as well.
Yeah, I mean the getting it to be hazy like this, have as much flavor as it does. So this is really where the question earlier about mouthfeel, this is where mouthfeel becomes a really interesting thing. And again, it's very purposeful, right? So creating a beer that's hazy like that, has that appearance, as a guy who's had a number, my fair share of New England IPAs, I look at that beer, I look at the haze, and my brain automatically just kind of expects, without me realizing it, that I'm diving into a beer that may even feel as thick as like an Orange Julius or a milkshake, as people will toss around that word to describe New England IPAs, right? And this one is absolutely not that. It's got all that flavor, but super light on the tongue, super balanced. So it's a really, that's something that you guys have obviously done extremely well. I know Matt is a little bit of a mad scientist at times, and he's known throughout the industry for being really amazing with hops. And this is absolutely a testament to that. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just acknowledging that. It was an absolute challenge to be able to put this together, because, like I said, it was an absolute balancing act of flavors, mouthfeel, and everything all in one. Ultimately, we wanted a really light, refreshing, hazy IPA to counterbalance a lot of what we were seeing out there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, another great summer edition. Super easy drinking, super light, great for summer. Super fruity. So, the kind of flavor notes that I picked out of this as I went through, like the aroma right away kind of hit me with stone fruit, kind of tropical fruit flavors and stuff. And just super fruity, right? And I think of a lot of IPAs, especially American IPAs that we drink, tend to be a lot more citrus focused, a lot more pine focused. And so it was really interesting to have something that conveyed a lot more tropical note to it, and that's all hops, right? The yeast plays, into the fruitiness, obviously, but really you're bringing out a lot of hop character in this. So really well done. Were there any questions that popped up, Emma, about this beer while we were talking?
Yeah, so the big question is, just for reference, if this is like a low calorie IPA, what is a regular IPA calorically? Do you know how it compares?
That's a great question.
Andy, I could actually jump in there for you if you want, because we do a lot of testing with our beers in general. Again, going back to Matt's lab background, part of a big piece of what made Firestone Walker so unique was we grew our QC lab with the brewery. And so we test every single beer that we make. Oftentimes we test other people's beers for them as well. Jason and Kevin are going to have to weigh in on what the calorie content of the blonde and the lager were, because I'm not sure about that one. But from a hazy IPA perspective, you're going to see a lot of variance. Because there's so many things that they can add to those beers that will change that calorie content. When you see the really thick, really viscous hazy IPAs, not only can they be adding things like wheat flour or oats But they can also be adding things like lactose sugar, and all those things that add to the body and add to the sweetness are also adding calories. And also, once you start tapping into higher alcohol content, you can have a hazy IPA that's in excess of 300 calories. And that was, again, that was a lot of conversations that we had with folks about creating Flyjack in particular was, oh man, you know, I couldn't tell you how many times I had people say, oh man, I just had a whole bunch of big double IPAs over the holidays. I've gained a whole bunch of weight, and you know, I'm so full, and I need to have something that's a little bit lighter. That was a lot of the driving force behind this.
Awesome. Oh, it's a great beer. It's a testament to you guys. I really enjoyed this one. Great. Well, our next beer I'll move on to is White Street. So let's pull out the White Street Hoptastic. I was really excited about this one when it first came out. I used to work with White Street again in my wholesale days, and was always a huge fan. You know, White Street Kolsch has been a go-to beer for me for a long time. The White Street Optimist IPA finds its way into my fridge frequently. And so I was excited to see this one and sad that I wasn't working with you guys anymore when it came out. But Amanda, why don't you tell us a little bit about this beer, and then we can talk about the flavors.
Well, thanks for that, Andy. And to your point, one thing that White Street has done really well over the past 7 years is we make very traditional style beers. We're known for our Kolsch, which won a gold medal at the World Beer Cup a few years ago, which we're incredibly proud of. We've got our Optimist West Coast style IPA and our Scottish Ale. So very traditional classic styles is what we've always been known for at White Street. And so going into 2020, we wanted to launch our first seasonal line. And we thought, why not lead with a hazy IPA, because they're obviously quite popular in the market. So we decided to launch this beer as a seasonal. We used Samba hops as part of our hop bill. Samba hops was a new experimental hop from BSG this year. What makes this hop so unique is that it's just gushing with big notes of tropical fruit, a lot of pineapple, mango, peach, passion fruit. So you get this incredibly rich aromatic aroma. And then true to hazy IPAs, you take that first sip, you get a touch of bitterness. A second sip, that bitterness is almost gone. So just a really unique style and a lot of fun, and really outside what we've normally done in the past. And the beer's done so well for us, we decided to make it part of our year-round portfolio, which we were incredibly excited about. But then, because this was a rare experimental hop, we used up all of the Samba hops. So those Samba hops are no more. We literally sent our head brewer's mom in Colorado an hour away from home to a bottle shop, or a homebrew shop, I'm sorry, to buy the last 10 pounds so we could brew our last batch. So pretty exciting, but we do have a hop contract for 2021. So look out for this in early February 2021.
Awesome. Now, I mean, I think when I tasted these, because I had gone through and tasted and given myself some notes over the last couple of weeks leading up to this, and I had tasted these two, you know, separately from each other on different nights, and now having them side by side, the previous one and this one, like, you guys hit this note of tropical fruit both. That's just fantastic. And what's really interesting is being able to, again, the mouthfeel, you know, it's an awesome example of being able to really tell the difference between, you know, two beers that have different mouthfeels that otherwise could be seen as very similar beers. So let's take a step back for a second, though, because we didn't really talk about the New England IPA style and how it's sort of dramatically different from West Coast IPA style. So, you know, Amanda, what's different about making this beer versus making Hoptimist for you guys?
So first is going to be the hops, obviously, that we're going to be using overall. That Samba hop's really going to give us a lot of those tropical fruit characteristics. In Hoptastic, we also use flaked oats and wheat. So that's going to give it that pillowy, almost creamier mouthfeel that you're describing. That's also going to help add to that haziness. So between the hops and those flaked oats and are going to create that haziness. Yep. So that's one of the biggest differences. Obviously, the other one is the bitterness. So when we're making Hoptastic, because it's a West Coast style IPA, we do a 60-minute hop addition of Bravo hops, which gives it a big bitterness characteristic, or those big bitterness notes that you're used to in that West Coast style. In Hoptastic, all of our hop additions are late in the boil, and we do 2 dry hops during fermentation.
There you go. Yeah, that's a big distinction, right? So you'll see a number of these like hype breweries out there that will talk about double dry hops. You'll even see that sometimes on cans of beer that'll say like a DDH beer, DDH blank, whatever the name of the beer is, meaning double dry hopped, right? Which is that idea that you're stripping as much aroma out of the hops as you possibly can. So the science that's behind that is when you're using hops in beer, the hops have these alpha acids, and those acids, when put under heat, they isomerize. The actual physical structure of the acid changes. It's still the same acid, but now the molecular structure of it has shifted. And when you do that, isomerized alpha acid is bitterness. It's what gives beer bitterness. And you get that by obviously heating the hops up. So when you put hops in early addition, is what they call it on the hot side, right? You're putting those hops in at the beginning of boiling the beer. It's taking as much of that alpha acid and isomerizing it throughout that boil that'll last like 60 minutes. And then if you add hops at the end of that, really what you're getting is aroma rather than bitterness. And then to wait days, weeks later even, to put those hops into the fermented beer long into the fermentation, you're really just getting the oils. It's all aroma, it's all flavor, with practically none of the bitterness whatsoever. So just a really interesting contrast between the hazy IPAs and the IPAs, and why hazy IPAs sometimes are seen as a more approachable style than a regular IPA. They just don't have that bitterness. So. Did we have any other questions pop up on this one?
So we have someone in the audience who has 2 six-packs, and they're saying that they poured their 2 separate beers and they're the same flavor but different colors, and is wondering if that is typical.
So in most instances, it would not be. We are currently using a mobile canner, and in our last batch that we packaged, I'm going to guess that was probably the August 3rd batch, there was a slightly higher dissolved oxygen content when canning the beer, which did slightly affect the color. So the beer is obviously exactly the same. Flavor profile is the same, aroma is the same, but because of that slightly higher dissolved oxygen, there is a slight difference in the color. But good news, we have fully invested in our own canning line for 2021, so we are moving to all cans, and that will not be a problem moving forward.
Very cool. And then we have one more question. How long does it take to brew a batch of Hoptastic?
Generally, it takes about 21 days, give or take. So because this beer gets no fining or no clarifying agents, it's actually pretty quick. So we pull it into the bright tank just for 3 days to let it sit, let any sediment kind of fall out to the bottom, and then we package it.
Very cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we've stretched well past 8 o'clock here, so let's continue moving through these beers. The next one I wanted to pull out. So if we were thinking about this as a meal, which is often how I think about beer tastings, right? We start out with the least intense kind of flavors, right? The most delicate flavors, the things that are going to linger the least on your tongue, and move into more intense flavors. So we've done that now, you know, moving from, say, a salad course or an amuse-bouche with the lager and the blonde ale, moved into a little bit more of like a main course with a couple of IPAs, and now we're going to move into dessert. So we'll open up the Wicked Weed, and while we're cracking that and pouring it out, I'll let Greg talk a little bit about it.
Cool, thanks, man. Yeah, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I always like to think of Wicked Weed as two breweries in one. You know, we have our clean side of our production, focusing on West Coast IPAs and Belgian ales, and then we have our sour program. So Burst is kind of that bridge between the gap, in my opinion. We wanted to make a beer that would have mass appeal in terms of just, you know, accessibility for the drinker. So someone who's never had a sour beer before, we wanted to make that beer for them. Someone who loves to just sit around and drink a ton of sour beer, but doesn't want to like down 4 Tums afterwards, we wanted to make a beer for them. So this beer has a ton of fruit flavor, really bright coloration, absolutely brilliant. And then just a hint of acidity to kind of tingle your taste buds. I like to kind of compare it to if you've ever had really tart grapefruit juice that's fresh pressed, or if you've ever had something like, I don't know, really, really tart lemonade. That level of acidity is kind of what we were hoping to achieve with it. So again, shifting your palate from focusing on hops as the main flavor driver in the beer over towards fruit. So Burst for us fits that void. We do rotate the fruit flavors. We just got out, or we're about to be getting out of the watermelon dragon fruit season. And the new one is going to be raspberry starfruit. That one should be hopefully hitting around mid-September, late September. But before that, we had cherry key lime, we've had passion fruit and lychee. So always just trying to find new, like really exotic fruits to experiment with and be able to highlight those fruit flavors while also giving that punch of acidity to get people to be like, okay, this is what sour beer tastes like. So now maybe they've never had a Brett Farmhouse or a true barrel-aged American sour ale. Maybe they graduate up to that and just like kind of, you know, get your palate to get used to that level of acidity and fruit flavor and whatnot, and what fruit can do to beer.
No, this is a great, I mean, you're talking about that hybrid of like, you know, an entryway almost sour beer, right? You know, not shocking people by going straight into like the complex, deep acidity of a blended sour that's sat in barrels for years and has all the fruit characteristics and stuff maybe that are there, but also picks up some, can get some kind of weird notes. I mean, stuff that people describe as mousy and horse blanket and barnyard and stuff like that, right? This is a great gateway towards that direction. You know, tasting it, smelling it alone, like it's just, like I saw someone in the, even before the smell, I should say, I saw someone in the comments say holy pink. And right, I mean, think about the sensory impact that it has when you're pouring what you expect to be a beer, and it is a beer, but it's pink and it's this. You know, it's definitely something that you know, beer drinkers may not be super familiar with or prepared for. You know, you get fruit flavors in beers, but this is definitely fruit in beer. So, and on the smell, I definitely get that kind of tropical fruit for sure, but expressed in a totally different way from, say, the tropical fruit of those IPAs, right? Like this comes through as a much more fruit punch style. The watermelon is really nice in it. It almost steps towards being like a fullness of fruit, because I almost feel like I get a little bit of rindiness, like you're talking about, like that grapefruit juice that approaches that rindiness but never quite gets there. So I really enjoy this beer.
Yeah, and one thing that makes this beer a little different than your traditional ale brewing process is that during post-fermentation, we actually do dose the beer a little bit with lactic acid acidity. So that's something that I always like to clarify too, is that this is not a mixed culture fermentation beer. There's no live bacteria inside of it that acidifies it. It is all the lactic and citric acid that give it that acidity and lowers the pH just a little bit, but it also amplifies the flavor of the watermelon in conjunction with that, which is really awesome.
Yeah, which is a cool note from the science of it. So you're creating an expression in a very controlled way. You're creating an expression of acidity and creating an expression of that fruit quality that's going to come through without having to depend on yeast that could, that wild yeast. I mean, the name, calling it wild really describes the way that brewers think of it, because it could go any direction. I mean, you put wild fermentation in place, a spontaneous fermentation in place, and you could have barrels like this, a barrel room like this, where a third of those barrels end up getting dumped because it's a sour facility and it just doesn't taste right? You're letting the microbes do the work in a really uncontrolled way. So it's really, from a scientific standpoint, it's really interesting that way. So. Any questions about, have we had any questions pop up? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it actually just went away. So I wonder if I think Kevin answered it. It was about whether or not you use chemistry to test quality and consistency in beer. But,
yeah, versus
yes.
And I said, yes, both.
Yeah, I'll do a small plug. I work for a company called Precision Fermentation, based in Durham. How many? I'm curious to see how many people in the audience, by a show of hands, work in some form of STEM industry. Not STEM cider, just in STEM: science, technology, engineering, math.
Right. 31 out of 74. So just under
Wow.
half.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because it's a huge industry, like locally to the Triangle, right? I'm surprised none of our panelists raised their hands, because the reality of it is beer is it's a process. It's a scientific process, right? And any brewery, all of these guys, a cidery, brewery, all of these guys on this panel that are worth their salt have a lab program at their brewery, have a quality control program at their brewery, right? And because you have to monitor things to keep quality and consistency going. And it's not about, bad beer is not going to make you sick. You can't get food poisoning from beer, in other words. There are other ways you can get sick from beer, but not food poisoning. What the quality control does is really zero in on getting the flavor the way you want it, getting all the rest of the sensory the way you want it, the mouthfeel, everything else, and making that as consistent as you possibly can, so that from one batch to the next, you are getting that consistency. And so you'll notice that question that Amanda was asked earlier about the color being different between a couple of different six packs. They have an answer for that, right? Because the instant a brewery sees something like that, instantly it's going to the science of what happened to try to figure out what's going on. And obviously they've done that. So what my company does is track that stuff for the process. These guys are laughing at me. I'm plugging, and I've had a few beers. My wife will tell you, my beer thermometers have gone off here. But yeah, Precision Fermentation, we track fermentations in progress. STEM actually has us plugged in. None of the rest of these guys do. They'll get there eventually, but STEM's using us. So with that, on that note, Maddie, let's move on to our last. Absolutely. Let's move on to the cider, and let's talk cider, Maddie. I'm excited.
Thanks for leaving me 2 minutes. Oh, guys, welcome to the cider world. We're happy to have you for just a couple of minutes, because I know we're running out of time, but I'm gonna run through this real quick. This is our lavender cider. This is our current seasonal. Very, very straightforward as far as as far as the production goes. Essentially what we do is we take a particular acid level and sugar level, and that can be different from when we're making it to keep the consistency of the flavor. And then what we do is we take that blend, ferment it, and then the big difference between what we do and what a lot of cider makers are doing is that we actually ferment and then stop our fermentation at the level of sugar that we want our cider to have. And I think that that shows, and the big difference there is that what most cider makers are going to do is they're going to ferment to 100% dry. And what that means is they're going to have all the sugars consumed by the yeast. And then the way they're going to create the sugar level that they want is they're going to add a little bit of sugar back by either adding juice or by adding sugar itself. The difference for us is we're actually going to stop the fermentation by literally cold crashing the liquid. So chilling the liquid down to the point where the alcohol can't live anymore. The yeast can't live anymore, and that's gonna kill the fermentation process. And what that does is it keeps a consistency and a congruency between the apples and the juice and the sugars that you're getting. Because what you're getting is not something that's added back, but something that you're essentially getting out of the actual juice that we're fermenting. So there's a consistency there that you're not going to get out of a lot of other ciders. From there, what we do is we ferment that cider. We finish that fermentation process. And for us, with this lavender seasonal that we make, literally the only other ingredient is lavender flowers. We use dried lavender flowers, and we use an infuser. So after the fermentation has taken place, we essentially rotate and infuse the lavender into the cider to give it this sort of like very nice, light, undertoned lavender flavor. Obviously, lavender can typically come off soapy when it's too much. And I think Stem in general does a really, really good job of keeping flavor profiles at a minimum so that you can taste the apple as well as the other things that we want you to taste. We want you to taste the lavender, but we don't want you to just taste lavender. We want you to taste raspberry, but we don't want you to just taste raspberry. We want you to taste all of those things. So those are the big points with this lavender cider. And yeah, I'm going to leave it at that.
I just want to tell you the best comment I've seen so far is, holy crap, that cider is delicious. And I'm not a cider person. So I
love that.
You're converting people over here.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. We want you to, listen, the thing is like, we're on a big beer panel here. Beer is amazing. In fact, I had a beer before I had a cider because I love beer too. You don't have to be a beer person or a cider person. Like, I love beer. I'll drink 3 beers, but if I have 3 IPAs, my palate is crushed. And I'm going, okay, I need something to refresh that. Cider's a perfect opportunity. The acid is incredibly high. Have a cider in between those beers. Get the opportunity to refresh your palate. Give it another opportunity to have another IPA, because once you have that cider, you're ready for another IPA. If you try and go to 3 or 4 of them, A, you're drunk, but B, you also, it's a lot to take. It's a lot of flavor, and the cider can really help with that. It doesn't have to be an either or. Mix it up, make it interesting.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about your ciders, Maddie, about Stem ciders in general is finishing off, like I knew when I had this cider, I knew I wanted to end on this one because I feel like you have been instrumental in converting me towards, if I have a cider on hand, and especially one of your Stem ciders, like it's a great, fantastic way to end a run of things, right? In the same way that we love to finish our meals with dessert, but this would be like, this is not a heavy dessert. this is light. It's balanced. It's you know, so fruit forward, obviously, but in this really kind of complex and yet at the same time impossibly simple way. It's you guys make delightful ciders. I really enjoy them. So
Thanks very much. I want to see a show of hands of people who thought they didn't like cider until they had this tonight and now are like, oh, maybe I do. Maybe I do. Maybe I do like cider and I need to try some different ones.
Growing. We're at 9.
There we go. I'll take 9. Come on over to the dark side.
I've got
Come
12,
hang out with
so,
me.
yeah.
Perfect.
awesome.
Thanks, so guys.
Well, everybody, we are wrapping up. I just want to take one more second to say thank you to our amazing panel and thank them for answering all these questions. There's some really cool questions answered in our Q&A box. And then I also want to thank our sponsors, Sam's Bottle Shop, where I think most of you probably stopped by to get your beer, and Harris Beverage. We could not have done this without you, and we really appreciate you. And then all of you for attending. We're really glad you're here. We've been missing you on the after hour side, and we are excited to be in the same virtual room as you. So we're glad you're here. Thank you so much. I'll drop that link one more time if you want to donate, and then it also should be in your email. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Emma.
Thanks, guys. Cheers. Thanks, Sam's Bottle Shop. Appreciate all y'all's hard work.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank all y'all.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Andy.